Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. This is actually my second time at Latitude, and so I'm thrilled to be back talking to you about blockchain. A couple of questions for the audience before I introduce our speakers. How many of you are tech people interested in healthcare? Raise of hand. Okay. And how many are healthcare people interested in how blockchain might be able to apply? Okay, and the third and very important question for my speakers and myself, how many of you have no earthly idea how blockchain can possibly help anything in healthcare? All right, fair enough. I hope that your minds are changed a little bit after you speak with, after we speak with our people today. I'm going to introduce a couple of people. Again, my name is Ruth, and I started out as a registered nurse in the hospital. So I started out in healthcare. Then I became an attorney and got into all the regulatory space. And then I went to work for a small company called Kaiser Permanente out in the United States, where they deployed the largest civilian healthcare database in history. And went on to work for Ernst & Young after that. So my first speaker is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Rymedi, R-Y-M-E-D-I. And so he actually is someone I met about a year ago. And they were looking at a blockchain project that they were doing over in Asia. And they reached out to me because of all my posts on LinkedIn about Estonia. And so they said, we would love some input from Estonia on our blockchain project that we have going on. And so I became very interested in what they were doing in blockchain. And so please welcome for me Dave Stefanich, the CEO of Rymedi. Our second guest is probably known to most of you, he is a former deputy health minister of Estonia, and he is now chief medical officer at Gardtime. And I met Ain about 3 summers ago in Tartu, where I participated in a Garage 48 event. And as luck would have it, I was chosen to pitch the session at the end of the day. And Ain was one of the judges. And fortunately, I had wonderful team members who were brilliant from the University of Tartu, and our team won in every category. So without further ado, please welcome Ain Aaviksoo. So I want to start with David. Please let us know a little bit about your experience with Rymedi, kind of how Rymedi got started, and when you kind of first started looking at blockchain. Because, you know, healthcare is a very personal thing to a lot of people. And when you try to mix tech and healthcare, sometimes it's really hard to understand how they connect. And so your expertise, right, is more in the life sciences space. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in blockchain and how it might apply practically to your situation.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career as a research chemist. So I was doing research internationally. I've lived out of the U.S. more than I've lived in the U.S. When I was a chemist, I found that I wasn't really impressing the ladies a lot, so I became a software engineer, which didn't really help make the migration to attracting the young ladies. But to give me a background to become a CIO for life science companies. So during that time of being a CIO of life science companies, I noticed at cocktail parties, there would be the clinicians in one area and the formulators in another area, and no one really talked inside of these global companies. And those silos really allowed for inefficiencies, and innovation was stifled. And then I got more involved in global health. We found that those same inefficiencies actually happen globally. Regulatory landscape, different companies, different agendas that are out there, protection of IP, things that are stymieing, you know, healthcare and wellness in the market. And what we found is that we brought these parties together on a common regulatory focused protocol that allowed innovation and sharing across, but we had to have trust. Wellness is a very long, interesting process from identification all the way to eradication of a disease. There's multiple steps, and every party has a different agenda. So we needed to do two simple things: enable wellness and enable trust. And that's what we did. So by writing these aspects and this metadata to each step of this wellness process, we established trust between the parties. And I don't mean trust as I trust data as GDP of Mongolia is $2,400, but I have a $30,000 pharmaceutical coming from the US. How can I ensure that it gets from the pharmaceutical company to the patient? How does the World Bank fund those types of activities? That real physical trust between commercial entities is really why we put together the Rymedi protocol for its purpose-driven space to bring wellness to market.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Dave. And Ayn, as former Deputy Health Minister of Estonia and now working with Gardtime, what was your first exposure to using blockchain? I know yesterday I was listening that Estonia used blockchain before it was even called blockchain. So you probably have the longest history of most people with these aspects.
Right, thank you, Ruth. I did meet Michael, CEO of Gardtime, in 2009. And I got fascinated about the practical approach what Gardtime chose at that time already, so 10 years ago. So that what I've learned in the recent probably 2 years is that, people get into Rome and tell, well, I have this wonderful blockchain and that will solve all your problems. Doesn't work. So
Right.
I got very quickly intrigued by the approach, what we call tech stack approach. And actually, this is something that you learn in Estonia, that you do have a PKI-based ID, an identification management. Then you have, and you don't need blockchain for that.
Correct.
Then you have, for secure transport, you have X-Road. And again, you don't need blockchain to transport data from one place to another. More so, you don't want your health data to be in the blockchain because you can't get it out from there. And then you have the data integrity piece, which is that, okay, when the data is in more than one places and the entities want to talk to each other, as David explained, in a trusted manner, and if the same data is separated, say, by time, so in 10 years' time, you want to be certain that the medical information is still valid in that next point. So there, you can use blockchain for certain purposes. So understanding that this practical approach can do wonders in an area which, if you haven't figured, currently, it's estimated healthcare industry size globally is, depending on how you calculate it, $7 to $8 trillion. We have this huge.
That's with a T in case we
yes,
have the
yes,
audio
trillion.
out there.
So
Yes.
and it's predicted to grow. I've seen predictions, 8.5 up to 9 to 10. Anyway, the growth rate, annual growth rate, is larger than the total volume of timber industry globally, which is 500 billion, which in Estonia we had a huge outcry, will we have a pulp factory here in Estonia? And the argument was, is it good for our economy or not? So I hope that you paid attention to what Tono Esko said, that it is actually something very valuable that we have built here. We have the culture, and we also know how to handle this data in a way that you can preserve your privacy, and at the same time you can build value-adding services, and entrepreneurs in that way can make money, but not putting the integrity of individuals and their data at risk.
No, and again, those are two critical aspects that you're going to hear repeated with the use of blockchain technology within healthcare and life sciences. And to that end, and to really get to the practical pieces of this, David, please share with us a couple of highlights of some of the real projects going on that Rymedi is doing.
Sure.
I'd love to hear more about that.
I'd be happy to. And a lot of times you hear me speak about, I don't need the sexy aspects of blockchain and technology. I need the practical aspects. And I was sitting in the waiting room and I was looking at my badge, and we all have badges here, right? This is really metadata. This metadata describes me. It's within a regulatory framework. It can be masked. It can be handled, but that's step one, right? Knowing who's getting treated. And then everybody else have a rapid diagnostic in their pocket, or is that just me? Probably just me. But this rapid diagnostic has to be tied. So blood's given to this individual, and now I have to know who it is and who is tested. And the regulatory framework says, is a clinician trained, right? CGMP, CFR, ICHQ7, European directives. But once that's done, you have a secondary follow-up, which is a blood sample. Then that blood sample goes to a different lab, to a different party with a different interest, right? So each of these individual steps are going to go to 3 different parties, and the person's still not cured, right? You still have to figure those pieces out. So then they have to go out and they get something called tenofovir. Tenofovir is a cure for Hep C.
That's hepatitis for people who
No.
aren't familiar with
Yep.
the shortened version.
Yep, so Hep C,
Liver disease.
all of these pieces individually do not bring wellness. Right? When you have a cold, you get a medication, you get a blanket, you have soup, you feel better. That's wellness. That's what we put in market. What Rymedi does is we bundle all that together so that wellness can be achieved. Okay? All that trust we're talking about in a way that can be understood across multiple parties, multiple countries. But I've worked around the world. How many people have been in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, besides me? Anyone? Simbona and Johnny? There we
see
go.
a few hands
Perfect.
out there.
Perfect. Wellness isn't found in conference rooms. Wellness isn't found in hospitals in the same way that it's found in the market, right? So we like to go out places. So I brought a video. I'm going to introduce you to my friend Boggy. You could play that video, please. So the infection rate of Hep C in Mongolia is, I'm going to stand up, is about 8.5%. The national global average about 2%. This is my buddy Boggy. He was my driver. He walks in, he pulls out his national identification card. Remember that metadata I just spoke about? He shows it. That piece of software right there is scanning that card and identifying Boggy International Health System. That clinician is actually holding up the same rapid diagnostics that I showed you, scanning them to make sure that they're not counterfeit, right? Because counterfeit's a problem outside of some established markets. Is she trained to administer that test? So Boggy's going to sit there. Fun fact, we stuck Boggy so many times in making this video that I don't think he's going to talk to me next time I go back, but it was a pretty good time. So now she's talking about education. There's 8 dimensions of wellness. We actually enriched the metadata for the EMR because the National Data Center asked us to do that. She's explaining that this is a positive test, but that's okay because wellness is education and wellness is trust. He's explaining that we're going to go over to another facility that's in their same liver center location. He's using his exact same badge, identifying now he's with a medical doctor, he can ask questions. They're doing a vial load test. That $4 test can be funded by the National Health Organization and actually used to go back to tie through. The same piece of software is used the entire time, and those transactions are written in protocol so we can trust that transaction. So right here, he's actually explaining some of the side effects of Hep C, which is liver cancer and cirrhosis of the liver. Now, here's the scary fact. Every day, someone dies every 80 seconds from Hep C. The cure for Hep C has been in market for several years, and it's still occurring. That's why there's places like the Liver Center in Mongolia, because people don't understand the education, and these diseases are not being treated outside. He walks into Mongolia. Monas is the pharmaceutical. It looks like a CVS, Walgreens in the States, or any other pharmacy you would see. So he walks in. So this is one seamless transaction of bringing Boggy Wellness. He walks up to the pharmacist, uses the exact same badge one more time. She can trust that the diagnosis, the education, the processes of wellness are actually shared. She can go scan it. So there's 3 different, there's HID, RFID readers in there. But on the shelf behind you, you're going to see, we had to make sure the medicine was in there, in the pharmacy. And we had to make sure that it was trusted. So that cure of tenofovir, again, $30,000 in the US, gets funded by the World Health Bank and brought to Boggy so that Boggy can understand wellness. And the terrifying fact is, I know that video is 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And while I was speaking to you, 3 more people died from something to be cured. As healthcare people, we can fix that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's a really exciting project. There's one more project. Just take 1 minute, if you would, please, about one that's up and coming with the Food and Drug Administration pilot in the United States, because I think that may help us really understand some of the guidance that's so needed in putting practical pieces together for healthcare organizations on the ground. So it's not just in Mongolia anymore. It's being, part of this is being brought to the United States. So please share with us for a moment about that.
Yeah, sure. So the FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. It's the regulatory body that's in the US market, Japan, and the UK. Very similar to European directives, very similar to ICH Q7, Q9 you'll hear around the rest of the world. One of the problems of innovation and wellness is regulatory landscape is challenging. But we don't think regulatory landscape is challenging. We think it's a quality add to the market. So it can be a sustainable competitive advantage to a market if they understand and adopt it. So we had structured the Rymedi protocol to fulfill the regulatory aspects of all those pieces. And we were just honored to be selected for a pilot project with the FDA. We'll be doing a project in the US as well as relating it to Kenya. and that way we can walk through, and it takes that fear of the regulatory landscape out of innovation, and we'll be participating with them over the coming months.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your input. So Ayn, I know you have some amazing projects. You just came in from Paris as well, telling the story of what Gardtime is doing with blockchain in healthcare. Please give us some examples of what's happening at Gardtime.
Well, what we've discovered over the last 6 months is that the difficult part is not to find problems you can solve by linking trusted data between different stakeholders. The difficult part is to choose where to start from. There's a great demand. 30% of this $7-8 trillion industry is a waste, and most of that is related to distrust. So that we have chosen to start with making the data accessible, which is that you heard from the Estonian Biobank or large academic hospitals or biotech companies. They have these huge piles of data. And if they want to give access to that data themselves, the companies, but also their legal departments, but also people whose data is being there, they want to be certain that this data is processed only the way how it should be, either from the legal point of view or from contractual point of view. So that with the blockchain, you can have this provenance of the data processing. So again, it is pretty much as David explained, the data stays where it is in those different places. But by having the hash or the fingerprint of that data secured over the blockchain makes it possible that whenever something is processed, you can have an overview, an oversight, and then give this confidence to people and to the companies and organizations, and also their legal departments or outside auditors, that the data is only processed the way how patients have consented or what the legal framework allows it to be. The next thing is outcome-based contracting. This $30,000 treatment or many other new technologies are just too costly with this old model whereby some theoretical average efficiency is applied, and then you give a drug to 10 people and you hope that 5 of them will get better because you don't know exactly which of them will be upfront. Now, thanks to, well, be it genetics or just other analytics, we know much better which of those 5 people are. But then again, if we only apply that cost to those people, the current business models, which assume that the price of the drug is distributed by everyone so that those who benefit would get it cheaper, this model doesn't work. So if we shift this now, that we pay only for those patients that get actual benefit from it, it is possible, but since those benefits won't come at the moment when this purchase is being made, but it comes in 6 months' time or years' time, sometimes even a few years down the road. So you need, again, this data infrastructure to actually monitor and measure all those steps in between. Okay, the solution would be that let's give all that data to pharmaceutical companies and another bit then to insurance, and then they too agree what kind of money to pay for me. I'm not happy with that. You would not be happy with that. So what you can do is if you sign the original data in their original sources, and then you start doing something with what we call data visibility, which is that you do not transport the data from one place to another, but you do some aggregated analytics, you do multi-party computation, you do zero-knowledge proof. For instance, does Aaviksoo have blood pressure lower than something is a question that might trigger that payment, but they don't need to know my exact blood pressure. The question, did Aaviksoo attended 5 times to see his doctor, again, is a question that needs only the answer yes or no in order to release the payment. So if you have this underpinning infrastructure, which enables the original data to be trusted, you can start building crazy, wonderful business use cases on top of that, which do not require all of them blockchain for a start, to make it clear. You don't even need to start from smart contracts, but yes, down the road, at some point, we might get to the point where those payments are triggered automatically. But up until then, we have very many simple and practical solutions where blockchain does this important trust bit, and then you engage in nice and really rewarding business interactions. So that's what we are doing right now.
That's so important, because the recurring theme I'm hearing here is the immutability of the genealogy of the data, and then just that whole trust piece. If you had to pick 1 or 2 aspects of blockchain. And most people immediately go to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. At least they do in the States because of all the hype. But if you had to pick like 2 aspects of distributed ledger technology, I'll talk about that. David, what would you say that those would be in your world that you find most useful, the properties of blockchain?
Right. Well, it has a lot to do with education. So a lot of money was raised, a lot of hype was done, and you had to calm down the industry. Remember, healthcare is a risk-based industry, right? We're affecting people's lives. So taking it, again, away from the sexy to the practical pieces, knowing that you can have multiple parties globally delivering wellness to the market. And Ayn did an amazing job. The net present value of the cure is far less than long-term healthcare. Bottom line, you cannot cut costs to outpace healthcare, right? You got to think about it with new economic models. And when you put the underpinning and explain the protocol and the trust and the genealogy that is going to be there, and you have a lineage of these activities that occurred, then people are open to exploring new business models for those activities, because financial challenges should not be a reason to not help people in our communities that we know, people abroad. I've traveled to places all around the world, and everyone, a child always has the same look of fear. I may not speak the language, but we understand it, and the technology can enable those kind of things to be delivered.
That's great. And Ayn, some pearls of wisdom about that. I know you mentioned that, but the particular technology aspects, I know there's tech people in the audience, but I want to emphasize that we are all people who came from healthcare and life sciences. And if you're a tech person, I encourage you to really reach out to people in healthcare and help really understand their issues. So if you had to pick 1 or 2 aspects that you find most useful about the properties of blockchain, what would they be?
Right. Apart from being a risk-based business, it's also a trust-based business. So if you can increase the trust, this is what a great gift to healthcare industry. Trust between patient and the doctor. So if I collect my data from various sources, I might need certain support in order to make it trustworthy for the doctor to act upon. One doctor generating data to be used by another doctor. And again, if that another doctor can trust the data that came from this one source, or if we enlarge that we are collecting data through clinical trials, which, for instance, 50% of clinical trials do not get the needed patient numbers. $5 million per day is lost if the clinical trial cannot start because they don't have enough patient numbers. So that there are huge numbers involved, and all of them can be, and well, by the way, this $5 million later on will be paid by insurances, because all that development cost is factored into the price of the drug. So if we can reduce the time from a good solution to the individuals that need, because we trust the entities that collaborate, we trust the data for research purposes, I think that's just really passionate for me to be in there and to see that we do have currently those practical solutions, and we don't need to start selling cryptocurrencies in order to make people healthier with the blockchain.
Thank you. The word game changer kept popping up in my head. And so I encourage all of you to think about that. We are out of time, but if you have questions for Ayn or David, we are having a question and answer session in the TransferWise room. And I thank all of you for coming. I hope it helped you understand a little bit more about the practical uses of blockchain. Thanks.